the sheer amount of lives lost in hurricanes is just it's just tragic. It breaks my heart because again, you're so powerless when it comes to fighting the nature. Whoa! Look at this. Everything's. Is that water?
It's insane. 60 inches of rain were recorded in Netherlands, Texas. All this rainfall obviously led to a lot of flooding and hundreds of thousands of homes being destroyed.
My God. Before we start, one thing I love with you guys is that you stay with me even though I have the worst equipment out of all reactors out there. This mic, it's my head hurts just from editing the videos, from keeping my breathing out of the mic. So I really appreciate that. And I will, of course, update everything. But I want you to know that I appreciate every single one of you. Let's get into today's video. So we've now learned that there's a difference between hurricanes and tornadoes. So now we're finally deep diving into hurricanes. I'm so curious to see, will it be more scary than tornadoes even? Let's find out. Welcome to today's video. So if I'm not wrong, I think hurricanes are formed on the sea, and that's the difference between tornadoes and hurricanes. So tornadoes are formed just by the wind on land, and hurricanes are formed on the sea, I think. Also, one question before we go. So, for instance, we watched Detroit was close to a lake. Can you get a hurricane on the lake, or is it just the sea that you can get them? But we'll see today the top 10 worst US hurricanes by Swaggle Studios, our favorite here. So please go and watch the original video and give him a subscribe because he puts in a lot of work on his videos. So give him a shout out. Say that Halftime Noel sent you maybe. Awesome, guys. So let's see if we learn something new. I don't know how scary or, devastating they will be, but it will be interesting to learn. And let me know, do you have any stories with hurricanes? Let's get into the video.
The United States is just a natural disaster prone country. You got
yes, we've noticed
tornadoes, wildfires
as well. That's also a thing. As someone said, earthquakes as well. Wow.
Even freaking volcanoes on
volcanoes. You have volcanoes.
Mount St. Helens. But out of all the natural disasters, one in particular rises.
Just gotta see if I'm recording
above the rest. Hurricanes are by far the costliest, most destructive, and deadliest natural disasters.
They are. Okay, interesting. Interesting.
The US. Well, at least until the next asteroid impact. And today we're going over the top 10 worst historic hurricanes.
Why is he
we'll be
using
looking
that?
At 3 factors to determine these ratings: cost, death toll, and power. And we're starting the list with number 10, the very recent Hurricane Ian that spanned from September 2022 to October 1st.
Do you have the same scale? So is this ranked on an EF scale as well? Or is it a different scaling system?
2022. Hurricane Ian was, at its peak, a Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric pressure of 937 millibars. Peak wind speeds from Ian measured in the 160
I'm sorry, the footage is gone. It's not on my video.
mile-per-hour range. Initially forming over the Caribbean Sea, Hurricane Ian would make landfall as a Category 3 hurricane over western Cuba on September 27th, where 5 fatalities would occur.
Crap.
After passing over
This
Cuba,
looks brutal.
Ian was then to a Category 5 hurricane.
Wow, this looks brutal.
As it slowly approached the U.S. mainland.
So is this seems to travel a lot more distance than a tornado does. And is it connected to the... Wow, this is completely new.
Hurricane weakened to a Category 4.
I'm really curious to see
right
this.
Before striking southwest Florida on September 20th.
Florida, oh, we got a follower from Florida. I hope you weren't too affected by this one.
And then tore its way all the way across the Florida Peninsula to the Atlantic, where it would then swing back around, striking the coast of South Carolina near the city of Georgetown on September 30th.
Holy cow, that one traveled a long way.
Overall, Hurricane Ian caused a total of $117 million worth of damage, making it the third costliest hurricane of all time. And while Ian did cause some damage in the Carolinas and in Cuba, we really need to focus on one state in particular, and that is Florida.
Okay.
Because it was here that by far the worst damage occurred.
Oh
the
my
hurricane claimed 161 lives.
What?
But 150
Oh, this was a dangerous one. Oh my God. And it's ranked number 10? It's ranked number 10 with 150 plus lives lost.
These deaths occurred in Florida alone. The city of Fort Myers and its surrounding
look at this. Everything's... Is that water?
Suburbs in Lee County saw 72 deaths. This high death toll was caused by a variety of factors. One being the 15-foot storm surge that flowed onto Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel Island, and Bonita Springs. The flooding destroyed 52,000 buildings, and it even caused the Sanibel Causeway to collapse, cutting off road access to the island. And it wasn't just the coast of Florida that was heavily affected. Large amounts of rainfall caused major inland flooding, and there were even several tornadoes spawned. particularly in southern Florida near
several
Miami.
tornadoes.
Due to the significance of the storm, the name Ian has been retired by the World Meteorological Organization. Moving on to number 9.
Whoa. Okay, a lot happened there. Okay, so the last bit, did they retire a name? Why was it so like significant that Ian, this was the hurricane that's called Ian? Nothing else can be quite like it, maybe. I don't know. Wow, this was devastating. And we see actually now that hurricanes, they bring the water with them. Maybe that's why they're so dangerous.
Hurricane Camille.
Number 9.
Forming on August 14th, 1969 and lasting until the 22nd, Camille would peak as a Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric low pressure reading of
So we got some categories, not an EF5 scale. Now we go Category 1 to 5, I think.
900 millibars, making it one of the strongest hurricanes on today's list. This hurricane featured wind speeds near 175 miles per hour. It also featured a very similar path to so many infamous Atlantic hurricanes, forming in the Caribbean Sea and then moving up towards the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Florida. While hurricane formation was slow at first, environmental factors such as a warm environment and moisture over the Gulf of Mexico allowed Camille to quickly strengthen to a strong Category 5 hurricane with wind speeds near 170 miles per hour. Forecasters initially thought that Camille would head towards the east, towards Florida, similar to Ian in the last entry. However, they would be a bit off with their forecast. Here's a chart of the forecasted path. See these lines?
This is interesting because it brings so much water. Is there any footage of a hurricane
over here?
Like
those are the forecasted paths of Hurricane Camille. And this line on the far left, that's the path that Hurricane Camille actually took. This meant that a lot of people in Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana were not properly prepared and were caught off guard when on August 18th, Camille made landfall
caught off
in Bay
guard.
St. Louis.
Oh, that's the worst thing when it comes to tornadoes, at least, that you're caught off guard, like the Joplin one. And now we've seen poor Alabama again and Louisiana. We got some followers from there, and to be there unprepared, super scary. Where do you take protection from this? Because if a flood comes, what can you do?
Mississippi at its full strength, with the wind speeds around 175 miles per hour. These high winds wrecked the coast of Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, destroying thousands of buildings, resulting in the loss of 143 lives in these 3 states. One urban legend tells about a supposed hurricane party at an apartment in Pass Christian, Mississippi, where 23 attendees died.
Horrible. Look at the devastation. It is almost like a tornado. See, everything is just crumbled. Wow, this is insane. Look over there as well. Wow.
And only one made it out alive. However, this urban legend has mostly been debunked. There was some good news. Since Camille was traveling at such a fast rate, there was little rainfall on the coast. However, the same could not be said for Virginia. By the time the storm reached Virginia on August 20th, its pace had slowed significantly, leading to huge amounts of rainfall, resulting in massive flooding and
okay, there's something I'm missing. So if the storm is moving slower, that's when the rain comes?
Landslides in Virginia. In fact, more people died from blunt force trauma caused by the landslides in Virginia than those who were on the coast. Overall, 153 people.
Whoa! Okay, this is completely different to a tornado. There's so many dangerous things connected to a hurricane as well.
Would perish in Virginia, 123 people in Nelson County alone. 21 of these victims were all from the same family.
Oh, no.
Hurricane Camille remains the deadliest natural disaster to ever hit the state of Virginia.
Horrible, just a whole family. My thoughts are with them
Overall,
as always.
Hurricane Camille claimed 259 lives, and due to this high death toll, the name Camille has been retired by the WMO. Number 8 is one that I'm sure many of us remember quite well, and that is Hurricane Harvey in 2017. Now, while Hurricane Harvey only...
So tornadoes, we haven't had an EF5 for 12 years now. I've learned a lot. There were actually some debates if the weekends here, if any one of those were an EF5, I got told by Fernando. Anyways, but it seems to me that we've had many recent, or 2 out of the 3 here are just in the recent years.
Peaked as a Category 4 hurricane, which is still very strong. The hurricane is tied as the costliest hurricane on record, causing $125 billion worth of damage. The storm that would become Harvey first began as a tropical storm near the Lesser Antilles Islands, but would eventually weaken back into a tropical depression as it crossed the Caribbean Sea. It would eventually make landfall over the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, but then suddenly pivot north into the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico.
There it is.
These warm waters helped the hurricane to quickly strengthen to a Category 4 strength. with a minimum low pressure
Holy
reading of
cow.
937 millibars. Harvey continued north until it struck
Holy
the
cow, do you guys know all about these ones as well?
coast of
Or do you have storm chasers for these ones?
southeast Texas. There's one factor that makes Harvey stick out from the other hurricanes on this list, and that is the insane amount of rain that was dropped on Texas. I mean, holy goodness, the amount of rainfall is ridiculous. Look at this radar imagery. Watch this radar loop of Hurricane Harvey. The hurricane makes landfall over Corpus Christi, and then it just stops.
There it is.
Like, it literally just like pauses over Corpus Christi. It's crazy. And then it slowly picks up the pace and slowly moves to the north. Now, specifically look at the
We remember from the Gerald tornado that if a storm stops, it isn't as good as you think, because the people that are stuck where it stops, pour them.
precipitation over Houston. Oh my word. It's insane. 60 inches of rain were recorded in Nederland, Texas. All of this rainfall obviously led to a lot of flooding and hundreds of thousands of homes being destroyed.
My God. The devastation is in lack of words. Better words.
Hurricane Harvey remains the wettest hurricane on record in the U.S. Rain wasn't the only damaging factor of Hurricane Harvey. There were also 22 weak tornadoes throughout the state. Overall, 107 people would tragically lose their lives in the U.S. 103 of these people were in Texas. Hurricane 7 is actually a weak hurricane, only a Category 1, but before we get to number 7, a quick word from today's sponsor, PDS Debt. Sometimes in life...
Sorry about that. Just going to the next one right now.
Back to number 7, the weak but significant Category 1 hurricane Agnes. The storm that would become Agnes formed on June 14th, 1972, and dissipated almost 1 month later on July 6th.
1 month?
The path of Agnes is an interesting...
1 month? So tornadoes last for an hour, maybe shorter. Not an expert. This one lasts for how much?
2, and
A week?
Hurricane Agnes. The storm that would become Agnes formed on June 14th, 1972, and dissipated almost 1 month later on
1 month?
July 6th. The path of Agnes is an interesting one.
1
First
month?
forming down by the Yucatan Peninsula,
Okay.
Agnes struck western Cuba
Okay, so this was... Usually it seems... No, actually, they all form from here.
in Florida as a Category 1 hurricane with wind speeds near 80 miles per hour. While weak, the storm did claim lives in both Cuba and Florida, but the story of Agnes was just beginning. Hurricane Agnes is interesting as while it was a weak hurricane, it was able to maintain its strength as a tropical storm as it traveled over the United States through Georgia, the Carolinas, and up to New England. In fact, most of the destruction from this hurricane occurred way up in the northeast in Pennsylvania and New York.
That's a new
the
one.
destruction was
New
very
York.
similar to Hurricane Harvey, as
New York is pretty far up, right? So it made its way all the way up there.
most of it was the result of loads of rainfall and the resulting flood.
You're riding boats in the city. That's how deep it was.
Take a look at this rainfall map, and you can easily see
How'd you even get rid of the water? Might be a stupid
which
thought.
areas were impacted the most. Virginia saw 13 deaths, New York saw 24 deaths, and Pennsylvania saw 50 deaths. Much of the flooding crest records in these regions are still in place today. Some were over 30 feet, which is crazy. That's like entire buildings swallowed up by water.
Look at
like
that.
Under the water, and like
That's
no roofs peeking out.
apocalyptic.
The flooding was so bad in Maryland that it caused the Gwen Oak amusement park to close its doors forever. Pennsylvania was the most impacted, where 70,000 homes were completely destroyed.
Maryland. We got a follower from there. Might it be Baltimore that's there?
Within Pennsylvania, Harrisburg on the Saskatchewan River may have seen the worst damage from the flooding.
My
Some buildings
God.
were under 17 feet of water. In fact, one cemetery located at a pretty high elevation flooded, leading to 2,000 caskets floating amongst the waters.
My God. Woof. That's eerie. Oh, poor people.
Unfortunately, there were also 3 tragic indirect deaths when a helicopter filming the flooding in Harrisburg crashed on June 26. Overall, Hurricane Agnes shows that while you may be far away from the tropics, you can still be at risk for tropical storms under certain conditions.
Wow.
Moving on to number
Traveled
6,
for
which
so
is another
long.
recent hurricane. This spot goes to Hurricane Maria in
Are these real pictures? Like again, I'm a 2017 again. A lot of recent ones. I bet you remember some of them.
A Category 5 major hurricane with a minimum barometric pressure reading of 907 millibars. This hurricane featured peak wind speeds of 175 miles per hour. The hurricane originated in the Atlantic, northeast of South America. When it made landfall over the island of Dominica, it was already at its peak strength with wind speeds in the 165 mile per hour range. These are the highest wind speeds ever recorded on the island. 98% of the buildings on the island saw significant damage. Maria dropped large amounts of rainfall, which in turn led to deadly landslides.
Wow.
Overall,
landslides. I think, is landslides basically what it says? Land is moving.
65 would lose their lives in Dominica. Now, Hurricane Maria is a bit different from the rest of the entries on today's list. Technically, this list is about the worst hurricanes to impact the United States. Hurricane Maria wasn't much of a problem for the U.S. mainland, but it had a huge impact on Puerto Rico, which technically is a U.S. territory. Even though technically they have their own Olympic team. I found that out like literally yesterday. Anyway, I wasn't originally going to include them on this list, but it was just such a tragic and horrific event that I just had to. Maria claimed,
of course, we need to remember the victims. So I think it's good, even though that it's not technically, or maybe it is technically in the U.S. I still think it's important to remember these stories because we learned so much from them.
3,059 lives. 2,000 that I just had to. Maria claimed 3,059 lives. 2,975 of these deaths occurred in Puerto Rico. 2,975. Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico on September 20th as a Category 4 hurricane with winds.
It just swallowed it up. My God, guys.
Speeds in the 155 mile per hour range. These high winds, along with storm surge, destroyed hundreds of thousands of buildings. The power grid went completely offline, leaving 3.5 million people without electricity.
Wow.
The Doppler radar was even destroyed, and these are built to withstand some pretty strong winds, like 135 mile per hour winds. Hurricane Maria is by far the deadliest hurricane on American soil in recent memory. Number 5.
Holy cow, that was scary. Oh, now we got a older one, 1957.
Hurricane Audrey formed on June 25th and dissipated quickly on June 29th, 1957. While Audrey only peaked as a Category 3 hurricane with max wind speeds in the 125 mile per hour range, she still managed to claim 416 lives over the U.S. mainland.
The sheer amount of lives lost in hurricanes is just... It's just tragic. It breaks my heart because, again, you're so powerless when it comes to, fighting the nature. And you can't really do anything.
Initially forming over the Bay of Campeche, Audrey slowly crept north and struck one of the U.S.'s most vulnerable hurricane spots, the Gulf of Mexico coast of Texas, Louisiana, and Alabama. One thing you may notice from the...
Why is it that vulnerable?
...list is that when hurricanes hit this area, it's almost always catastrophic. Audrey made landfall at the Texas-Louisiana border on June 27th. In Texas, Galveston saw a large amount of the destruction as the storm surge broke through the Galveston seawall, flooding large amounts of the city. One fishing ship off the coast, with 9 crew members near Galveston, capsized, killing all occupants on board. As bad as it was in Texas, the damage was even worse on the Louisiana side of Audrey. Millions of acres were completely flooded, and the town of Cameron was almost completely destroyed by a 15-foot storm surge. In fact, the only building left in Cameron was the courthouse.
Can you even be a storm chaser and chase hurricanes? It seems too dangerous.
It was in Cameron where the majority of the fatalities occurred. 371 out of the 416 deaths occurred in the city. The parish of Cameron, Louisiana is a hurricane magnet. In 2005, Hurricane Rita slammed into Cameron, destroying most...
Wow, look at this. Another subscriber said that you can't build shelters because under the ground of Louisiana, it's just water. So maybe that's why it's more sensitive to this?
The town.
It's a very flat country?
Again. Thankfully, in 2005, pretty much everyone had evacuated. But again, in 2008, Hurricane Ike destroyed 80% of the town. Due to all the hurricanes, Cameron, Louisiana's population dropped 80% between 2000 and 2010.
Oh, wow.
One of the biggest reasons Audrey was so deadly was due to the lack of evacuations. Much blame was put on the Weather Bureau for not properly...
That's the thing, right? Again, if you're too late to notify the people, it's just... disaster waiting to happen.
With the residents on the Gulf Coast. They did warn of the hurricane, but they were just pretty lax about it. This actually all led to the Weather Bureau / United States being sued by residents in these areas.
Oh, wow.
In the 1963 case.
What do you think about that? Well, it depends, right? If they didn't know, they can't report on it. But if they did know, wow, you need to get it out there ASAP, not wait for the next broadcast or
Party
anything.
v. United States. The case was unfortunately dismissed. Number 4 goes to the 1935 Labor Day Category 5 hurricane,
the earliest
on August 29th
one.
and dissipated on September 10th. At its peak strength, the Labor Day hurricane featured 185 mile-per-hour wind gusts with a minimum low pressure reading of 892 millibars, making this hurricane the strongest, most powerful hurricane on record in the U.S.
Oh, wow.
The storm initially formed to the east of the Bahamas.
Like
as it headed west.
What do these different colorings mean? Is it more dangerous here in purple and red and lighter here in the bluish?
Towards the Florida Keys, the hurricane quickly intensified to a very powerful Category 5. At this point, it traveled off the Gulf Coast of Florida, up through the Panhandle and over Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia, and then finally back out into the Atlantic Ocean, where it would eventually dissipate.
Okay.
The 1935 Labor Day hurricane was not only extremely powerful, but it was also very deadly, claiming 423 lives. The most impacted were the Florida Keys, specifically the upper Keys of
Florida again. Where is the Florida Keys?
Long Key and Craig Key, where an 18-foot storm surge swept over the islands and the very southern tip of the Florida Peninsula. Just look at this. The town of Isla Mirada took a direct hit and was completely destroyed. The railroad line connecting the islands to the Florida mainland was also destroyed, preventing aid from responding quickly. Today, situated in Isla Mirada, close to the location of the town's post office at mile marker 82 East on US Highway 1, stands a monument that was created by the Florida Division of the Federal Art Project. This memorial marks the location and burial of the ashes of over 300 victims.
Wow, insane. If you're ever there, please make sure to pay your respects.
Going into the top 3, these storms get much more serious and much more deadly. Starting off with number 3, a hurricane that we are all very familiar with. I'm of course talking about Hurricane Katrina in 2005.
We're all very familiar. 2005, pretty recent.
2005. It's probably the most well-known hurricane event, and for good reason. It is tied as the costliest hurricane on record, causing $125 billion worth of damage. At its peak, Katrina was a Category 5 major hurricane with wind speeds around 175 miles per hour and a very low minimum pressure of 902 millibars. Hurricane Katrina originally formed near the Bahamas on August 23rd.
Like the other one. So if I'm right, skip that quickly.
Millibars.
If I'm right here, then it means that it was lighter here, and then they were at worst here, and this maybe was okay. Here it touched ground with some oranges, so maybe that's bad. If I'm right, I don't know. I shouldn't speak on this. I'm just guessing.
On August 23rd. 2 days later, on August 25th, it was strengthened to a Category 1 hurricane just before striking the east coast of Florida. Katrina weakened as it crossed the Florida Peninsula, but once the storm was over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, it rapidly strengthened from a Category 3 to a Category 5 hurricane
it's getting bigger.
In less than 9 hours. The hurricane then headed towards that really dangerous low-altitude coast of Mississippi and Louisiana. On August 29th, Katrina, now a Category 3 hurricane, slammed into New Orleans and the surrounding Gulf
New Orleans, we know that town. Ooh, okay. This is interesting because tornadoes have, if this is directly impacted, we've only seen tornadoes, like in my experience from what I've seen, not hit any like major towns, but this is a major town, right?
Coast. The high storm surge penetrated the various flood protection barriers, flooding 80% of the city.
80%?
The devastation can clearly be
80% of the city, New Orleans,
seen on Google Earth. The story of Katrina is really about the failures of the New Orleans flood walls. Like, look at these levee breaches on Google Earth. This barge right here smashed into this levee, destroying it, flooding the entire neighborhood. There were flooded interstates.
Tragic. Poor people. Ooh, that devastates me. That devastates me.
Walmarts had been flooded. The Superdome was heavily damaged, and there's a lot of drama around the Superdome. I want to eventually do like a Google Earth video on Hurricane Katrina, kind of like my old school video, just going over the damage and the recovery. So stay tuned for that. Overall, 1,800 plus lost their lives from Katrina, and
1,800 plus. Jeez. I don't know what to say. This one seems scary. I want to watch more of this specific one. Do you have any like videos like we did on Joplin and more maybe? But for this one, Hurricane Katrina?
1,577 people lost their lives in Louisiana alone. That's a huge amount. A death toll on the U.S. mainland like this has not been seen since the 1928 Okeechobee Hurricane. Speaking of the 1928 Okeechobee Hurricane, that is number 2 on today's list. Very powerful.
It's interesting. Everything seems to be like in that southeastern area of the U.S. Nothing on the west or east, and nothing on the lake by Detroit.
Category 5 major hurricane with estimated wind speeds between 160 and 170 miles per hour. This hurricane had a minimum low pressure reading of 928 millibars. This monster hurricane formed on September 6 off the coast of West Africa, way further away than any of the other previous entries. You might be wondering, how on earth Africa?
How, like, I think he was going to say that, but how is a storm traveling the whole world? Storm experts, please let me know.
Way further
How is it traveling the whole world?
away than any of the other previous entries. You might be wondering, how on earth were we able to track a hurricane in 1928? Well, it's because there were ships throughout the Atlantic that tracked the storm's progress. As the storm crossed the Atlantic and approached
Storm chases on the sea, that's something.
the Lesser Antilles Islands, it rapidly strengthened to what would be a modern-day Category 4 hurricane. The hurricane swung north and struck Puerto Rico, where a wind station measured 200-mile-per-hour
Holy
winds.
cow.
However, this rating is disputed and it's believed to be inaccurate, but still, I mean, obviously there were high winds regardless. The hurricane continued north over the Bahamas, where it would eventually make landfall in southeast Florida near West Palm Beach as a Category 4. The hurricane would then travel inland and slowly weaken as it struck the communities around Lake Okeechobee. Now in the Caribbean and the Bahamas, the hurricane claimed 1,600 lives.
So is it like a tornado or is it like a flood? Do you know what I mean? Or is it a mixture of both? Because it doesn't. I haven't seen any like tornado-looking stuff.
In Florida, in the U.S., the hurricane claimed 2,511 lives, making it one of the deadliest natural disasters on record for the United States. 2,500 of these deaths all occurred in Florida. Storm surge mixed with high winds destroyed thousands of buildings near the coast, specifically near Miami. But the majority of the fatalities came from the heavily populated southern portion of Lake Okeechobee, where the lake's dike collapsed. It's estimated that at least 1,800 lives were lost from the resulting flooding. Unfortunately, there are also major racial issues in connection to the 1928 Okeechobee hurricane. Many of the victims were black migrant farm workers and did not receive proper burials or even recognition. However, thankfully, they would eventually
no burials. Oh, that's tragic. No burials even
be recognized thanks to people like Robert Hazard, who helped establish proper memorials.
Thank you, Robert Hazard, whoever you are. I think every victim deserves
as well as
proper burial.
Writer Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote Their Eyes Were Watching God, a novel exploring the hurricane's impact on black migrant workers. Before we get to number one, a couple of honorable mentions. There's the 1899 Puerto Rico hurricane that resulted in 3,885 deaths. There's Hurricane Sandy in 2012 with 254 deaths, 150 of these being in the U.S. This was number 11 on my list, and it was actually number 10 for half of the time I was editing this video, but I kept going back and forth. It just barely missed the top 10. Other honorable mentions include Hurricane Andrew in 1993, Hurricane Irma in 2017, Hurricane Wilma.
There's been quite a lot of them. That's for sure.
In 2005, the Miami Hurricane of 1926, and Hurricane Floyd in 1999. But now, on to number one.
Oh, I'm scared. Do you guys know what it is? Is it like clear and obvious for you?
Finally, we have made it to the number one worst U.S. hurricane on record. The infamous 1900 Galveston Hurricane. A tragic storm that claimed somewhere between 6,000 and 12,000 lives. At its peak strength, the Galveston Hurricane had a minimum barometric pressure of 936 millibars, with wind speeds in the 145-mile-per-hour range. Now, we've seen stronger hurricanes, but the damage caused by this hurricane is ridiculous. The storm remained relatively weak.
Were societies like built and prepared for hurricanes at that time, or was it just too strong?
As it passed over the Lesser Antilles Islands and Cuba, but like so many other hurricanes, it rapidly strengthened over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. From there, it would strengthen to what would be a modern-day Category 4 hurricane, and then smash into the Gulf Coast of Texas and Louisiana. This same area that we've talked about so much in this video. This is not a good area. Do not live in this area of the U.S. The hurricane continued inland and even
is it that dangerous to just live there?
Storm all the way up till Iowa on September 12th. As you could probably guess from the name, the island city of Galveston, Texas was the worst hit by the hurricane. A 12-foot storm surge swept over the city, flooding it completely, destroying 7,000 buildings. It's worth noting that the highest point in Galveston in 1900 was 9 feet above sea level. So yeah, the entire town was flooded.
9
to make
feet
matters
above
worse,
sea level. 9 feet above sea level. Could you give that in meters,
And
maybe?
much of the Texas coast in general endured 120 mile-per-hour wind gusts. Galveston was supposed to be a huge hub for Texas, a large and very important city.
Oh.
However, after the hurricane, many investors decided to take their money to the nearby city of Houston instead. So Houston became the hub for that area of Texas. While the death toll varies, the most common number is around 8,000, making the Galveston
poor people.
Hurricane the deadliest natural disaster in U.S. history. That concludes today's video. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with the entries on this list? What are some hurricanes that you would have added? I'd love to know. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.
Wow, very interesting. Swiggle Studios once again. What a video. What a video. But alright, to sum it up, this was scary, and it's so devastating because you have the water as well, and you even got some landslide connected to it. And just as we seem to have a tornado alley, we seem to have a hurricane alley almost as well in the southeast regions of was it Texas, Alabama, Louisiana, and Florida. That seems to be like the hurricane alley. Super scary, especially the one that was called Katrina. I want to deep dive into that one, so please let me know if there's any videos. And of course, as always, my thoughts are with everyone affected by this till this day. Thank you guys, and as always, see you soon.